Hi, in this episode I'll be talking to Josh Richards, a cave diver from down under. Over a brew, Josh tells me about how when he's not locked down due to COVID restrictions, he dives his Sidemount Rebreather in the freshwater caves of Mount Gambia, Australia. Oh, and how he's planning moving to Mars. Do you fancy a brew?
Yes, mate.
Hey, that's better. Sorry about that, mate.
Mate, it's alright. Honestly, I get it all the time with these time zones because ours changed. Our clocks go forward and backwards for summer and winter, don't they?
Right, and ours have just changed as well. I've just realised that
that's probably why.
That's why I was like, this doesn't make sense. I knew this was 7 o'clock, and yeah, it's why it's changed. So
don't worry, it is what it is, isn't it? Well, I've finished my brew, so
I've got mine here.
What are you drinking?
Coffee. It's definitely coffee this morning.
I tell you, I need it now. I've not really done a lot today, other than I've serviced 4 sets of regulators and emptied the bins. That's about it today. But I'm properly just worn out.
Are you folks back in lockdown now?
Yeah.
Are you in some, yeah.
Yeah, we've got 3 tiers now. So tier 1 is like the Billy Basic, just wear a mask and keep away from everyone. Tier 3 is no smiling, stand by your beds.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. But yeah, as of like Friday morning last week, that's just stepped up for us.
Stepped up, okay. But, yeah, it looks like we're actually about to step down. So
really?
Where I am in Victoria has been like the worst of the lot.
Yeah.
We've been hit quite hard by a second wave.
Right.
And yeah, basically it finally looks like the rest of the country has been sort of really ripping on us. Because this is where most of the people are, 6 million people out of 20-something million people. So, yeah, big economic hit by having Victoria locked down. And it looks like we're finally starting to step back, which is great.
Has it been a proper lockdown, though, where people can't go to work and all that?
Yeah, so we're kind of lucky here. So I'm outside of Melbourne. We're probably an hour and a half out of Melbourne. Just trying to think of something that's kind of the comparable London to Gatwick. So we're kind of Gatwick type. So technically we're classed as regional, which means I can travel anywhere in the state without too many restrictions. Got to wear a mask, still need distancing, all those sort of things. In the city itself, they're basically checking everyone's address, and if you're more than 5 kilometres from your home, you're being charged. Yeah, so it's been pretty full on for those folks in particular. I've been working as a carer for my girlfriend. She was in a major car accident in February, and so I've been kind of living carer through all of this. Yeah, and she hasn't been able to see her family, hasn't been able to see anyone because they're all middle of Melbourne. So anyway,
fortunately we've not got to that extreme now. So these tiers that we're under, you can still go to work, but if you can work at home, they're asking you to do so. Yeah, but it's not like the proper lockdown we had much earlier on in the summer where nobody was going out, there was nothing on the roads. It was completely crazy. But my biggest bugbear now is people I see on Facebook, on little videos and stuff, and they're all sort of antagonists. You know, if we're not allowed to buy certain things from certain shops, people are going in, kicking off and having a go at the staff. And it's not a retailer's problem. If he can't sell you clothes, but he can sell you, bread and milk, that's it, isn't it? And then they're not wearing masks. Just wear your mask.
We've had that stuff here as well. We've had protests and all sorts of things. It was like, it's actually comparably not that bad. Yeah. We had literally 0 cases yesterday, like for the whole state. And that's because of the restrictions. And so people have been protesting the restrictions that are clearly working. But yeah, no, I'm glad that hopefully it's going to ease. It's been nuts. It's been a weird year. So it means I haven't been able to use this gear a whole lot. Most of my diving, I'm guessing we'll talk about it in a bit, but most of my diving's over the border in South Australia. Right. And I can't get over there. Like I haven't been able to get over there since February. So,
That's pretty grim.
It's been a bit sad.
Well... Right, so Josh Richards, welcome to Fancy a Brew podcast. Thanks for reaching out to me when I did a bit of reach out a couple of weeks ago. So I appreciate your time coming on. It's a bit early for you and a bit late for me, but whatever. So if you give us a bit of an intro to you, mate, let us know where you are in the world, what you're up to and what's going on, and we'll see where it goes.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me on. My name's Josh Richards. I am currently based just outside of Melbourne in Australia. It is a little bit early here. I've been diving since I was about 12. My dad was a diving instructor from before I can remember. And I always kind of looked up to Dad a fair bit. I ended up going and doing a degree in applied physics and psychology, and sort of kept diving through a bit of that. Went and joined the Army and served as a combat engineer with the Australian Army. Decided that I wanted to get more involved with the diving side of things and moved across into the Navy as a clearance diver. Didn't stick around with that for very long, because I shifted across to the UK and went and joined the Royal Marine Commandos and spent a little while over there in the UK. Yeah. Decided that maybe comedy, stand-up comedy would be more entertaining than cracking jokes with the lads, with the Royals. And so I moved across and became a full-time stand-up comic. Did a few shows for the Edinburgh Fringe. And I decided to bring it all full circle. I'd done 2 shows for the Edinburgh Fringe, and I kind of wanted to get out of stand-up. And so I decided to write a comedy show about sending people one way to Mars. And I sat down just after Edinburgh Fringe in 2012 to start writing this comedy show about sending people one way to Mars, and found an organisation planning to do it. So these days, most of my time is split between either cave diving or going around and talking to people about how I'm involved with the Mars One project. And I'm one of 100 people shortlisted worldwide for basically a one-way mission to Mars. They're aiming for the mid-2030s, and I'm hoping to be one of the 4 people that are on that first crew. So that's me.
Right, we've got loads to attack there, bloody hell.
Excellent.
So where were you living when you were over here then? Were you always down south?
Yeah, mainly in Devon. Obviously based, I had a girlfriend in Exeter at the time. And so, I would basically go from Lympstone, the training base there, to Exeter each day. After that all went a bit pear-shaped, I kind of had a bit of a breakthrough personally and realised that I'd always been surrounded by people in the military. Dad served for 20 years. My grandfather was a Royal Marine. Like, there was all this family heritage around it. And after 6 years, I sort of came to the realisation that while I was good at what I did, the job was turning me into a bit of an animal. It was bringing out some of the nastier sides in who I was. A lot of the guys that I was sort of training alongside were all 18, 19, and I was one of the old lads at 24. And I was scared for a lot of these young guys. What I sort of saw as kids. I was scared for what they were going to see. And the mistakes that they were making, I could see were going to cost lives. The simple stuff, and they just didn't understand it. And it brought out a really nasty side in me, in that my reaction to that was to get angry, was to yell, scream, hit, all that sort of stuff, to make them learn and try and do the right thing, not necessarily because they understood why, but because they were scared of me. And I, after a year there, I sort of came to terms with the idea that it was never going to be a good, healthy thing for me. Utmost respect for all the guys, and some of the best people I've ever met still serve, are still there. Others, they did their time, they did their 4-6 years, and then sort of went, you know what, this has actually done a lot of damage to me in my psyche, and they've gotten out. But utmost respect to the guys who stuck with it. But I couldn't. It was just bringing out really nasty elements in who I was, and I could see it only getting worse the longer I stayed. So got out and turned to stand-up comedy, weirdly enough. So as you do.
As you do, mate, yeah. And then turn into someone who's going to be a potential Martian.
Yeah, what's that about?
So when you did you do much diving over in the UK? Or
no,
when you got back?
No. So I kind of, if I'm honest, the experience with the Navy here in Australia put me off. I had really wanted to get back into it. I'd left the Army. I'd actually spent a bit of time on Civvy Street working as a blasting engineer and working in the mines and those sort of things over here.
Wow.
And it left me in a really bad shape mentally, really, really bad shape after the sort of the fly in, fly out, 4 weeks on, 1 week off, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I used diving as my escape from that. Diving, I sort of rediscovered diving, got very heavily involved in the tech diving side of things. I went through and didn't do any rebreather stuff at that stage, but went all the way through to advanced trimix on open circuit. So we're doing 100-meter dives and things like that on wrecks off the coast of Western Australia. Got really involved in that time as kind of mental health recovery, and then went and joined the Navy going, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And the Navy with the bureaucracy just kind of stuffed me around, and it put me off diving for a while in the process as well. So when I went to the UK and joined the Royals, I didn't dive at all. Would love to have experienced Scarpa Flow, would love to have gone and dived all around the UK. It just, at the time, it didn't feel right.
So when you got back, and that did that sort of settle your sort of mental health? Did that really help your rehabilitation with that, or?
It did, but it took a long time.
Yeah.
I think discovering the Mars project, getting involved with Mars One, that sort of things, that gave me a real direction. What it really boiled down to was not knowing. Diving had a really calming effect, but I still needed direction. I still needed kind of a current to flow with, and comedy hadn't provided that. But getting involved with this Mars project, all of a sudden I had a reason to get out of bed in the morning. I knew how to dive and I could go and share that with other people, but it didn't give me the direction that I was really looking for at the time. And yeah, it was really this Mars project that kind of steered me for a while, at least until I discovered cave diving. As soon as I found cave diving, it was all in, back in with diving again. But yeah, it was all about trying to find direction for me, and it's kind of why I bounced between all these different things, is trying to find a purpose, a reason to sort of get out of bed and throw myself at things each morning.
It sort of, it resonates in me a little bit, that not for the same sort of reasons, but I've struggled all through my life, I find, to be happy at a level of something. You know, let's say I got the new iPhone 11. Oh, the 12's come out. The 11's shit now. I need the 12.
Yeah.
That kind of attitude. And since we were in proper lockdown and I started this podcast and really focused on what I was doing on YouTube behind the scenes, it's given me that purpose, and it's still all the way along the line. It's to do with meeting people, a bit of networking, learning, but always focused on the diving.
Yeah.
And I've never had that with anything. You know, I'm really happy at home, you know, got a nice house, decent business, lovely, beautiful wife, can't ask for much more, but I still want something, and that clear direction was never there. And it's only diving that's ever given me that purpose, which is a strange one, isn't it? That once you get that direction, life just becomes dead easy.
I did my basic sort of, here in Australia we've got a slightly different cave diving training system. But it essentially corresponds to sort of learning to dive in quarries and sinkholes, learning to dive in slightly overhead environments, and then learning to dive where you can really go quite a long way underground. And I did that first quarry sinkhole kind of level back in March last year. Did the second level fairly shortly afterwards in August. And I've got a regular dive buddy, and he and I we would just go hammer and tong for a week at a time. He would get time off from work, come and visit me, and we would just go flat out, and I would completely burn him out by the end of this week. And I still have a very vivid memory. We were at the bottom of this one cave site. You're still in the dry area, but gearing up, there's a little bit of a pool at the bottom of this ravine. And we both kind of looked up. We just finished this dive, and he's looked at me and he's gone, you just love this, don't you? You're just frothing it. Like, and I did. I had a little moment there where I was like, you know what? I love this. This gives me a really clear sense of purpose. we had been into this particular site, we'd been exploring, we'd been sort of venturing into areas of it that most folks don't go into, and we'd been learning stuff in the process. And for me, I think cave diving, it brings together all these different skills that I've always had, that I've had since a young age, learning how to scuba dive and feeling very comfortable underwater, but it gives a very clear direction. I never experienced the same thing with wrecks. I would kind of get interested in the wreck's history and those sort of things, but you could look that up. You could research those sort of things, but there were things about caves that you couldn't research. Literally no one had been there before. No one knew what it looked like. No one had built the cave. So you would go into these places and you would find stuff that folks had never seen before. And you'd then be able to share that with other people so that they could go and experience it in the future as well. And that was just, that was a mind change. Yeah, definitely a kind of a brain-breaking moment for me, realising why this was so important.
I've had my sort of two first experiences of what might be classed as a cave dive on the very fringes of it, only in the last month or two. So there's some mined caverns local to us. We went and dived a few weeks ago. So the light was coming in from the face of them, rather than above, like on a sinkhole, like a cenote. And that was just a cavern dive. There was always a clear surface. It was just dark as the night. But that was interesting, because we'd never done anything like that before. And then on Saturday, just gone, we dived a proper mine. So it's 30 meters down, and then there's a shaft that goes off for a couple of kilometers, I believe. We didn't go in it. Found it. Yep. I was freezing cold. I'd kind of contemplated. There's a 60-meter line to the first chamber, and I'd contemplated, do I go in that and have a look? Do I not? What are the pitfalls? What are the dangers? What are the advantages? If I go in, am I going to be excited about it? Is it going to do anything for me? And we didn't. I was freezing cold, I'm not going to lie. When you're just not feeling 100%, it's just not that day. I decided against it. And I think that was the best call I've ever made.
Definitely.
Really.
Yeah.
But it does intrigue me. Whether it be a mine that somebody's already dug, just for the interest of going seeing what the story of it is, or like you said, through some limestone shaft that's sort of a river flowing through it or something. And there could be something down there that's just washed down, but you would never know. It sounds phenomenal.
It's a really surreal experience, especially there does seem to be something that changes when you experience it. I went and explored. There's a mine site, a flooded mine site over in Western Australia, not far from where my parents live. And after I did my first level sort of cave course, I went and had a look at it. And it's very silty. It is nearly 80 to 100 years old, held up by wooden timbers and lots of stuff. And you're like, oh, not sure about this. But you go inside and there's that moment where you actually enter into the mine site, or you enter into the cave, and you're in. There's this really distinctive black-white. You don't get that with the cenotes or the sinkholes, but you do get that when you enter a cave site or a mine site where all of a sudden it goes dark, and you're like, I'm relying on my torch here to be able to see what's going on, and you are either on board with that or you're not. And I know a few folks who still cave dive reasonably regularly, but they're never quite comfortable in the cave. And that's fine. They get to explore it. They get to see different things, but they'll never sort of venture into that exploration side of things because they're never quite comfortable. I dived, the last sort of cave dive that I did was into a particularly nasty little wriggly hole. I came a bit unstuck. I pushed a bit far, and I didn't listen to that little voice that you were talking about, that one that sort of says, oh, not sure about this. I pushed a little bit far, and I did nearly drown in there twice. Where I got caught in some flow. I got separated from my buddy, and I literally had the regulator ripped out of my mouth by the flow that was coming out of this limestone. Reached for my backup, and in the process of wriggling around, the valve had rolled off, so the regulator under my neck was off. So in my panic, jammed that in my mouth and tried to take a breath, and nothing came out. And then went into full panic mode. And needed to get myself out and squeeze out through these rocks again. And you do have to listen, especially when you go into those kind of overhead environments. You've got to listen to that little voice that goes, not today. It'll be there tomorrow. And that was the concern for me at the time. My girlfriend was turning up. I was going to be teaching her an open water course for the weekend. And then we were leaving Mount Gambia for quite some time. And I thought, this is my last chance to get into this site. I'm going to squeeze in here. And what I should have done is just turn around and gone, not today. It will be here next year. It'll be here in 10 years' time. Doesn't have to be today.
Whether you're here in 10 years' time is another thing, though, isn't it?
That's another question.
Are you on a rebreather now, or are you still diving on the circuit?
No, so I try to stick to rebreather as much as I can. I bought a JJ rebreather.
I've got mine coming on Saturday.
Excellent. They're a beast. They are. Yes. Are you getting the JJ in particular?
Yeah, mate, yeah. I've paid for it. It's been delivered. I'm absolutely so excited, and it's even better that you've got one.
Well, I've sold mine now. So, so they're good. They're an amazing rebreather.
Yeah.
But for the cave stuff what I kind of came to terms with a few months ago, or actually probably a year ago now, is that I actually didn't want to get in salt water ever again. And that I almost exclusively want to dive caves. And so I've gone over to a KISS Sidewinder because it's got that side mount profile.
Yeah.
You'll find when you put the JJ on, you'll look at the back of it, and the round barrel of the body at the back basically acts like a cheese grater on limestone in caves. So it's not ideal because it's back mount, it's not ideal for that. But it is perfect if you're doing anything deep, if you're going into wrecks, if you're doing pretty much anything except squeezing into tiny, nasty little muddy holes like I do.
Fine.
So
I'm fine with that.
It's an amazing rebreather.
Yeah. So you've got the Sidewinder now, then. How long have you had that?
I've had it since June, July, but haven't been able to dive.
Yeah.
Because of the corona restrictions. We've been in lockdown here in Melbourne. My instructor is for that particular unit is on the other side of Port Phillip Bay here. And he's been pushing to go and do saltwater dives. And I've sort of gone, how about we wait until the borders open? I want to go and jump in a sinkhole. I don't actually want to ever put the Sidewinder in salt water if I can avoid it. So.
Yeah, fair one. Well, you may, or hopefully you'll know my guest tomorrow night, Steve Davis, who's got Speaking Sidemount. He's just on the KISS Sidewinder, and he goes to Mount Gambia quite regularly, I believe.
Yep. So Steve's podcast is actually the reason why Matt and I, like my regular dive buddy, both of us made the decision to get the Sidewinder.
Nice.
We both had experience with rebreathers. For him, it was the first, but we've both been looking at what we wanted to do and made the decision to go with the Sidewinder rather than the Sidekick. The instructor that both of us have worked with in the past teaches the KISS Sidekick. Right. And there's a lot of folks over here who use the Sidekick because it's very good for sump diving, and it's a bit tougher than the Sidewinder is. But yeah, we decided to go down and follow Steve's sort of precedent because the kind of diving that he was talking about is very much the sort of stuff that we are looking to do.
Sorry to interrupt this episode to drop another plug for my Patreon account, but I do spend several hours on each episode in the search for new guests, the recording, the post-production, the advertising, and sometimes days on my YouTube videos. So to help me keep up with its production and the frequency of releases, I'm asking for you to become a sponsor and Patreon of the Are You a Scuba Diver? Fancy a Brew podcast. When you become a supporter, not only will you have my undying appreciation for helping to support the podcast, but you'll be able to take advantage of some of the many tiered benefits that come with it, some of which includes official merchandise. If you'd like to become a patron, go to www.patreon.com/fancyaBrew. There you'll see all the many levels of subscription and how to join the Fancy a Brew community. So without further ado, let's get back to this episode.
So if I looked at your profile picture on Facebook now, you've got this tripod lowering you into this, what looks like a hole that's not big enough for you.
Yep.
So where are you going and what are you doing?
So that's a dive site called The Shaft. It's in Mount Gambia. I've got a bright orange helmet on my head at the time with this stupid grin. That's basically a vertical drop down into a pool of water. Vertical drop's about 8 to 10 meters, straight down. And as soon as you get past that little passageway that I'm squeezing down into, it opens up into quite a large cabin that's probably sort of lounge room size. As you drop down, there's ropes around the edge there where you can tie your gear off. So you lower each person down one by one. Then you lower their gear, you clip the gear off onto the side. And then once everyone's down there and geared back up, you then sort of point your head down into the water and it opens up into this football field size site. Like it's huge. They still haven't mapped all of it. They've known about it. Like Sheik Exley dived it in the 70s, I think.
Yeah.
Like it's this ludicrous site. We often compare it to the Melbourne Cricket Ground, the MCG here, in terms of size. As far as I know, they've sort of surveyed it down to about 130 metres, but it just keeps going. Like it's this insane site. A farmer found it something like 80 years ago. Basically, they were ploughing a field. So most of Mount Gambia is farmland.
Right.
They were ploughing this field, and all of a sudden, the horse that was dragging the plough along had its foot punched through into a hole.
Yeah.
And sort of they rescued the horse, got the horse out. They started putting rocks, like any loose rocks that they found, they dropped down this hole to try and fill it up. When you go and dive the site, there's this pile of rocks that is essentially 50, 60 years of this farmer trying to fill this place up. It wouldn't go to 1/100th of the room. Like it's just this huge rock pile in a truly epic room. Diving the shaft, if folks ever get an opportunity to go to Mount Gambia and the shaft happens to be open at the time, it's limited based on the farming. The crops in that particular field get harvested at different times, so there's limitations on when you can actually dive it. But if there's ever an opportunity to go and dive the shaft, it's probably one of the most extraordinary dives I've ever done. The only thing that's comparable in terms of mind-blowing nature would be diving Silfra in Iceland between the two continental shelves. Just extraordinary experience.
I'll make sure I mention it to Steve tomorrow, see if he's done
Definitely.
it. The sort of balance between the hazards and the fears for you, do you have any?
I definitely have fears, I can assure you, especially after that last dive that I did. That put a lot of things in perspective. I have a cave diver who I sort of met fairly early on, who I won't mention his name, but he's pretty world renowned, and he's acted as a bit of a mentor in many ways for both me and my regular dive buddy Matt. And the three of us sort of like to chat, especially if we're in Mount Gambia. The three of us get together and chat about all the different exploration bits and pieces. And he's been very useful. And he was actually my dive buddy on that last scary dive. He was outside the restriction that I then got stuck in. And he was there to sort of, he couldn't help much, but he could certainly sort of lend support underwater. And he's been great to be able to chat to about the fear elements, being able to control stress, all those sort of things. So it's really about deciding, I suppose, where your line is. For a lot of folks, cave diving is and should be an incredibly safe sport. There are very clear rules. There's very clear sort of things that you need to do in order to stay safe. What I suppose I'm talking about and what Matt and I are sort of venturing into and taking tips from this mentor is really the exploration side of things, where you start sort of really pushing in, and there's a lot of crossover between the wet caves and the dry cave side of things. And not everyone is super comfortable going into dry caves where you've got to squeeze in. it blows people's minds when I mention it, but I'm actually claustrophobic. So if you put me into some of these places without water, I'd be petrified. I'd be losing my mind with fear. But because you're weightless, I don't have that same experience of feeling trapped by my own body weight. So it's about knowing what causes stress responses, what you're comfortable with, what you're actually trying to achieve. There's no point squeezing into these awful, nasty little places if you're not trying to actually do something, if you're not trying to take a photo or discover a new part of the cave or whatever.
Yeah.
So for most folks, they're happy with going and seeing it. And the caves are absolutely gorgeous. It just happens that, especially for Matt and I and this mentor, we're really interested in looking at those parts where if someone's drawn a map of the cave and there's a question mark, we want to fill in that question mark.
Yeah.
We want to go and see, and maybe it leads on somewhere else. And you study geology and you study the nature of the cave, and you sort of go, well, it makes sense that this would connect to here. Let's go and have a look. Those sort of things. So that's not for everybody, and you need to reassess the stresses and the dangers to you and what risks you're willing to take to go and do those sort of things. So it's definitely not for everybody.
Speaking of not for everyone, I spoke to Robbie Schmittner last week, and he dives on his own. I mean, I'm a solo diver, and I'm a big advocate for doing that course, but he's diving in places like what you just talked about, absolutely tiny, muddy, black, scary, and I just wonder how you manage. You know, there must be elements of fear for him there, and he just seems, well, I've just been doing it for so long, it's become second nature to me, and I've got all the redundancy I could possibly need. Okay, fair one.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, there's a bit of that goes on as well.
Yeah,
there's a lot of that goes on, and especially when you're going into some of these particularly nasty spots, having someone else there actually increases the risk. So I have to be a little bit fuzzy on details, but I went into one particular site where I had my JJ rebreather on, and my buddy was ahead of me. He was going for a bit of an explore. He wasn't a super confident cave diver, and I had my rebreather on. I was trying that out in a cave for the first time, and I actually got myself stuck. I was following along behind him, and I got stuck. The stand on the JJ is quite substantial, the stainless steel stand that makes it hold up. So I got myself stuck and went, this is fine, I'll start to back up. And the stand caught me behind, and now I'm blocked. Just at the same time, about 5 seconds later, my buddy ahead got to the end of the line and went, okay, we're going to turn around. And he's starting to come back, and I can't move. So I've actually become a buddy plug. I've blocked him in, and he's on open circuit. I could sit there for 3 hours on rebreather, but he's on open circuit, and I'm the one that can't get out. So in that case, I was actually the one who was creating increased risk for him, creating a life-threatening situation for him because I was stuck. And he couldn't get back out. And you can analyze that and pull it to pieces and sort of say what I did wrong and all that sort of stuff. But the reality is, if he had been diving by himself, he actually would have been operating at lower risk than having some clown like me toggle along behind him. And especially when you're going into those challenging spots, having someone blocking you in behind seriously increases the risk. There's one site that Matt and I like to explore reasonably regularly, where if you've got someone directly behind you, you can't even signal to them to get out of the way. You can't turn around inside there. It's one way in, one way out, and you have to back yourself out again. And if there's someone else in close behind you, they're going to trap you there, and you're in serious trouble. So, yeah, I teach solo diving. I'm a solo instructor. I'm not allowed to teach it for caves, obviously. There's no agency in the world that approves of solo cave diving. But it certainly happens quite a bit, and it's not the sort of thing that you can provide insurance coverage for. It's not the sort of thing that anyone can endorse, but it certainly happens because you have to push those limits to go and explore further. Yeah.
So we've talked about mental fitness and how you've sort of overcome certain issues in your life through diving, but how important to you is physical fitness? When you've got all this gear, you've got a lump, number one.
Yep. And especially for the sites in Mount Gambia, it's particularly challenging. There's vertical access issues with some of the sites that we go to. So you're literally scrambling up huge rock piles to get in and out. Diving Kilsby Sinkhole in particular, world-renowned site, but you've got to walk up and down quite a substantial ramp, climb down some stairs, and if you're doing that with, a pair of 100 cubic foot sort of 12-litre cylinders, then that's going to be an issue. So there's a lot of divers that I see who aren't hugely fit, but they still get out there and they still do it, and that's great. But they're definitely not pushing. They're definitely not sort of the ones who are squeezing in different places. Without being sort of too rude to anybody, there are literal physical limits to your body to squeeze into some of these places. The one site that I've squeezed into that very few other folks have, and my mentor included, he physically can't get in because he's physically larger than me.
Yeah.
He's a very tall, lean guy, right. But his hips are literally larger than mine are. Like I'm a squirt. Like I'm a little 5'6", nothing. And if I carried more weight, or if I had literally physically larger hips, I wouldn't have been able to squeeze into this one particular site. And he is very lean, but he still can't get in. So if you're doing that kind of stuff, being physically fit makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of deep diving. Personally, I don't like the idea of, I don't mind doing deco stops. More than happy to do it, but I get a bit nervous going deeper and deeper. But the deeper you go, the better if your CV is better, your ability to process nitrogen out of your system is improved. The fitter and healthier you are, the less likely you are to get bent. So, there's a lot of benefits for staying fit, physically very fit. I think for cave diving, most of it is mental. Most of it is that, but being able to get in and out of the sites, being able to look after yourself, being able to keep diving requires a significant level of physical fitness as well.
Yeah, we were the same. On Saturday, we had to rope all the cylinders down. We had another two guys that weren't even diving that were able to help us because it was just, it was so wet. Yeah, and it's an old slate mine, so you can imagine all the scree and then the potential for overheads. Oh, it was fun. That's probably why I'm so knackered today still.
It does take it out of you. And like I said, with like Maddie, I joke and call him my dive wife because whenever he and I are around, like we just go non-stop.
Yeah.
We've had to learn, I suppose, to pace ourselves. He's leaner than I am, and he doesn't like the cold very much. He very much enjoys tropical driving. Yeah, and that's fine. I joke about being a penguin. I love cold water. I've always loved cold water, and I'm very, very comfortable. I'm actually moving permanently to Mount Gambia because I love the cold water and the cave sites so much. He, on the flip side, is based up in Darwin, like up in the tropics, and so we've kind of had to learn to pace ourselves because the cold knocks it out of him quite a bit. He doesn't enjoy it. I get in there and dive and then want to go back again and will actually go and burn myself out. He's much more aware of what's happening to his body than I am, and he'll sort of flag it up earlier saying, hey, you're wearing us out here. We'll be doing our third dive for the day, pushing limits, and he'll be like, hey, we need a breather. We need to take a day off here, lugging cylinders up and down hills and all that sort of stuff. So, being physically aware he's been great for me in winding me back. And I've been great in terms of being able to push him on to go into places that maybe he wants to explore, but might not without someone else sort of being there going, let's go and check this out.
I do ask most of my guests, how do you go about keeping warm? Because a lot of them certainly diving around the sort of areas that I am, longer, colder, deeper, and all that sort of stuff. They're subject to cold and they're perhaps not as penguin-like as yourself. So I'm always saying, so how do you do this and how do you do that? And luckily, I dived with my wife on Saturday and she looked at me and went, are you cold? And I was like, yeah, I am. Let's go up now. I've had enough.
Yep.
And I got out. My lips wouldn't even move, mate. Honestly, I could hardly talk.
So for me, it's very much dependent on what we're doing. Yeah. So, and who I'm diving with. I keep a few dry suits. I keep a tri-laminate dry suit that I sort of use for most stuff. But tri-lam you'll burn through tri-lam pretty quick if you're scraping against rocks. So anytime we're sort of getting in somewhere squeezy, I've got a neoprene dry suit as well. If we're getting in really squeezy, I'll switch over to a wetsuit. So I sort of keep all of them in rotation depending on what we're doing.
Right.
I suppose the coldest I've ever been was with Royal Marines, out on Dartmoor in minus 22. It was a bit fresh. And so for me, I suppose having been exposed to that sort of cold, I shouldn't actually say that's the coldest. The coldest I've ever been is up on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro during a blizzard. That was minus 56, and that's fresh. But when you've been exposed to those kind of colds for extended periods of time, like doing Summit Day on Kili is a 6-hour climb, and then it's a 3-hour climb down. So when you're out in that kind of cold for extended periods of time, it changes the way that you think, and it gives you new limits, I suppose, new standards where you can turn around and go, well, if I'm sitting in a sinkhole doing 30 minutes at 6 meters or whatever, and I'm shivering like nuts because I'm freezing, you can also sort of turn around and go, well, this isn't as cold as I've been. I've been a lot colder than this. I've put up with this for a lot longer. You will survive this. You just need to focus on breathing through it. So I keep all my bits and pieces to try and sort of stay warm, because if you're comfortable, then you're less likely to get bent, you're less likely to run into all sorts of issues. But at the same time, depending on the site, depending on what we're going into and how complex and squeezy it is, kind of defines what kind of exposure protection you're wearing. So I switch between all sorts of different things depending on what we're doing.
Fair one. So how's COVID affected you? Not dived for a while, have you?
I was about to say, it's pretty much stopped me diving, to be honest with you. So I worked our summer. So I worked for a dive shop in Mount Gambia through till about February. A lot of things happened at once in February. Decided that I needed to step away from all of it for a while. My girlfriend came out and visited me in Mount Gambia. And as we were driving back to Melbourne, where she was going to sort of, break me away from diving and the dive industry for a little while, she had a major car accident, nearly died in the crash. We were driving separate cars and I found the crash. And I've essentially been acting as her live-in carer during her rehab since then, as COVID has happened all around this. So COVID has sort of kept us all in lockdown and kept us localised here just south of Geelong, south of Melbourne. But at the same time, I suppose my carer responsibilities have also kept me here at the same time. So it's nice to see that as our restrictions start to lift, her rehabilitation is moving ahead as well. So she will eventually move back to Melbourne, go back to studying sort of in the city. And I will be heading back out to Mount Gambia after, I suppose, what's going to be 9 to 12 months out of the water. I'll be going back into it very gently, back into the sinkholes rather than the caves initially. But there are opportunities to dive here in the bay, in the salt water in Port Phillip Bay, but I've done it a couple of times, and that sense that I don't like the salt water. I don't like the waves. I don't like any of that sort of stuff. I really love that weightless experience of being in clear, fresh water.
It is nuts. It's like you're flying in it.
Yeah, and the first time I experienced that, like I mentioned Silfra before in Iceland, the first time I experienced that long before I learned to cave dive was at that site, and it felt like I was on the moon. Felt like I was on a whole other planet, just drifting through, completely weightless. Couldn't see the water, and it was just it blew my mind at the time. And I now realise that what I experienced there is the sort of thing that I experience in caves as well. And growing up, going and chasing crayfish and spearing fish and all that sort of stuff with Dad, scuba then. I didn't particularly enjoy it. I could do it, but I didn't really enjoy it at the time. Now I've found the thing in diving that I love, and I don't really want to go back.
Speaking of not going back, that's a nice segue into
beautiful
leaving this planet right behind.
Yep.
So you got some mega travel plans coming up.
Yeah. So I discovered Mars One in September of 2012. Like I said, I was researching a comedy show at the time and discovered an organisation planning to do exactly what I was talking about. I was using One Way to Mars as a metaphor. I wanted to get out of doing stand-up. I'd kind of gotten sick of the scene a bit, and I wanted to do something that had more meaning. I wanted to talk about science. I wanted to use my comedy background to talk to people about science and being excited about the universe that we live in. And I was using this example of a one-way mission to Mars as a way of doing that. And then I found folks who were actually legitimately planning to do it. So I was like, well, okay, I'm not going to say we should do this. I'm going to sign up, and I'm going to tell other people they should sign up too. And the process has just rolled on for the last 8 years. They've kept narrowing the group down. We've had 200,000 people sign up initially, cut the group down to the 100 that we have worldwide now. And it's just been this weird, wild ride. I've kept talking about it. I've kept sharing it with people. I've kept learning all along the process. I've had to ask some really tough questions about myself as to what I want out of life, what I want to do with myself, what I want to do with 10 years remaining on the planet, all those sort of things, and answer those questions. And every time I've answered those questions, I've basically realised that the big thing I was concerned about was diving. Legitimately was sort of like, there's not a lot of water on Mars. There is water on Mars, but there's not a lot, and there's not enough to dive in. So what is it about diving that I love so much, and am I willing to give that up to go and live on another planet? And the realization was, it's not about the sea, it's not about the ocean or any ounce of stuff. It's actually about being weightless, and being able to sort of drift around and explore places. So that experience that I get exploring caves in Mount Gambia or anywhere else here on Earth, in many ways is going to be replicated by living in an environment where I'm in 1/3 of Earth's gravity, and we'll be exploring the caves on Mars because they're potentially the best places for us to actually set up permanent colonies, to actually have people living underground, because they'll be protected from the surface radiation. So, yeah, there's a lot of crossover. It sounds wild, it sounds weird, but there's actually a lot of crossover between what I'm doing with cave diving and my potential, life on Mars in the future as well.
We discussed this, me and my missus, last night in bed. Of all the things to talk about, is your life in bed last night. And,
cheers.
And would we, and should we, and could we? And I know all the, the questions that you've probably asked yourself 1,000 times over, and I still don't know. It sounds so exciting, but I don't know. For me,
it's taken me years to answer some of those questions, and of the 200,000, well, it was 202,586 people who signed up initially back in 2013.
Yeah.
I've tracked a lot of different folks who signed up and then dropped out. As much as they selected 100, a lot of people dropped out well before that. That was the first time where they and the selection of the 100 happened back in 2015, and that was the first time they actually selected people. Prior to that, most people had actually opted out. They'd sort of signed up and decided when they were doing the questionnaire that, oh, this isn't for me after all. They might have waited a few months after they'd done the questionnaire and sort of gone, oh, actually, having a family is actually quite important to me. Being able to see my grandparents is quite important to me, all these different things. And those realizations didn't happen for much longer for a lot of people. In my case, with each realization, I've sort of gone, this is exactly what I want to do. It's gotten closer and closer to the idea of going to Mars, but most people have thought about it and the doubts have actually gotten stronger rather than eased. Rather than having that realization, I have to give up diving, but what do I love about diving? It's actually all the things that I'll have on Mars. They've sort of gone, I'll have to give up diving and it will actually be a genuine loss. So, yeah, it's a tough thing and it has taken me years to work through. I've actually just published a book about it, Cosmic Nomad, which delves into all of this. It delves into all those questions, what you ask about relationships, what you ask about owning a home or owning anything, how you feel about your connection to Earth, senses of home, where you belong, all those sort of questions. And it has taken me 8 years of pretty much non-stop talking about it to finally answer some of those questions. So it is a really tough thing for folks to contemplate.
So when you saw on the news that they've just so-called found some water on Mars, did that get your heart racing and just a little bit of, ooh, it's back on? Like when you mentioned your dad and JJ earlier, and I was like, I've got mine coming.
So one of the things I've learned through all of this is that space has a huge fan club. There's a lot of cheerleaders out there for anything space related. When you start really delving into the details around a lot of this sort of stuff, you realise that things have been discovered numerous times. I've got a tweet up at the moment. So when the Independent in the UK published an article saying that NASA was going to have a huge announcement on Monday about the moon, I put up a list, and it's basically like 1971. Oh my God, Apollo 14 found water on the moon, and like listed 5 or 6 different examples from the last 50 years where people are going, oh, we found water on the moon. And then at the bottom there, it's got 2020. Oh my God, guys, you'll never believe what we found on the moon. And sure enough, the announcement in the last few hours has been, it's water on the moon. Now, in fairness, it is fairly exciting that it's on the sunlit side of the moon, and that's great. It indicates that there's more water on the moon than maybe people suspected there was. But the reality is there's a lot of excitement around stuff that has actually been discovered for a long time. Every few years there's an announcement about more water on Mars. But we've known there's been water on Mars for a really long time. It's frustrating, I suppose, for me in some cases, because there's all this excitement and everyone gets really wound up about it. But if you watch it long term, if you're long term invested in these sort of things, you don't actually see a lot of progress, and that's really frustrating. It feels like in many cases people are actually preying on people's excitement about a particular thing to support funding to get something else, and they're sort of taking advantage of that excitement and not actually making major progress. It's fantastic that the Sophia telescope has discovered water on sunlit parts of the moon. What I would really like to see is more progress with sending people to the moon. I would love to go and explore the moon myself, but I'm sort of dead set on Mars. But we haven't seen a huge amount of progress, especially from government agencies, unfortunately. There's a lot of PR, there's a lot of celebrating and talking about how fantastic this is. But if you actually watch it long term, you don't see a huge amount of progress. And so I was trying to highlight that a little bit by sort of saying, hey, Apollo 14 found water on the moon. in a sunlit area in 1971. The Soviet landers found water on the moon in the mid-70s as well. The Indian survey probes found water, confirmed water on the moon in the last 10 years. So it's very frustrating to talk about a surprising and amazing discovery on the moon when in fact it's not hugely surprising. It's just that NASA has used a different kind of instrument to look in a different kind of area on the moon, and sure enough, they found water there as well.
I'm devastated that my news to bring to the table tonight is old news.
I always love people sharing, because again, it shows that people are excited and interested in all of it. But there is a cynical part of me that looks at things like this, and if I'm being particularly cynical about this particular piece of news, the instrument that's found water, the Sophia telescope, has been on the chopping block for funding for quite a few years now.
Well, haven't they just scrapped the 747 anyway?
That's
not being used anywhere else.
I don't know if it's been scrapped yet, but I know it's been on the chopping block for some time, and there's been massive issues about funding. And again, cynical part of me sort of goes, well, maybe they've helped justify their funding here a little bit by making this discovery. It doesn't reduce what the researchers have done. It doesn't reduce anything about it, but the huge announcement, the massive discovery, the big press around it certainly feels like someone sort of trying to justify a telescope that's maybe not sort of justifying its existence enough.
So what's the next progression for you then?
Next thing, I suppose, for me is kind of to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm learning a lot from cave diving, learning a lot from working in small groups with people in that kind of hostile environment. From Mars, we're really looking at cut group down to about 12 to 24 people who will actually become full-time trainee astronauts. We don't know when that's going to happen. That's been something that's been dragging on for the last few years now, and I've kind of put my life on hold waiting for it. And it's really been in the last 12 months where I've sort of gone, you know what, I'm going to go and chase all these other things here on Earth. And if Mars One finally gets their act together and moves ahead, that's great. I'll be right there to support them. But I couldn't keep putting my life on hold. I couldn't keep just making my life about what Mars One might do. I've sort of had to make the decision to live my life now. And if it moves ahead, fantastic. If it doesn't, I've written 2 books about it. It's been an extraordinary experience. And in the process, I've discovered cave diving, which is something that I think I could stay on Earth to do. I'm buying a house in Mount Gambia. I love the idea of being there. And so if it never happens, I'd sell everything and drop everything in a heartbeat if it was going to happen. But if things aren't going to happen, then I'm certainly going to make the most of doing something I truly love while I'm still here on Earth.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up, mate. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I hope you managed to realise that dream one way or another, because it'll be pretty phenomenal to go, see that guy that's just gone up there? I spoke to him 10 years ago, and he forgot about me as soon as we hung up.
Nah, none of that.
No, mate, honestly, I appreciate it. It's good that I did this little reach out a couple of weeks ago on loads of different Facebook pages and stuff, and so many different people.
It's always good to reach out into those different fields, and that's the cool thing about diving is that, like, the kind of diving that I do is maybe radically different from what you do, from someone else, whatever. But at the end of the day, we all love being in the water, and that brings a huge number of people together.
Absolutely. You're a ledge. See you later, pal.
But thanks, mate. Have a good one.
Sure. You too. Good luck.
So that brings us to an end of episode 41 with my friend Josh Richards. Links to all the things we discussed are in the podcast notes. You've been listening to Are You a Scuba Diver? Fancy a Brew podcast with me, Andy the Northern Diver. You can find more scuba related content on my YouTube channel. The link is in the podcast notes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a 5-star review. And to become a patron of the podcast, visit www.patreon.com/Fancy a Brew. There you'll be able to see the different levels of subscription and how to join the Fancy a Brew community. If there's someone or something you'd like us to discuss, please let us know via our Facebook page. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one.